think it's clear that there are two things the CCP hates. They hate sanctions, and they really hate the truth being exposed. And we see that by the way they react. So, for example, when the UK imposed a few very, very limited sanctions against a handful of officials because of the genocide in Xinjiang, China's response was to sanction a whole load of British members of parliament and entities, including, I myself am not named individually, but the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission, which I'm the co-founder and deputy chair, is on China's sanctions list. And they did the same with some European politicians and US and Canadian politicians. So that sort of retaliation shows that they really don't like it. And the reality is their sanctions against us are totally ineffective. Certainly in my case, I'm already banned from Hong Kong, so banning me from travel makes no difference. I don't have any assets in China, so it has no practical consequence for me. But it is a sign that what we do has some effect on them, and I think our sanctions against them are far more effective on them than their retaliation. But the other thing that they're scared of, as I said, is exposing the truth. And their reaction to the recent Uyghur tribunal in London was extraordinary. The number of press conferences they had denouncing it, and denouncing it in extreme ways. I mean, accusing Sir Geoffrey Nice, who, of course, had previously chaired the China Tribunal on forced organ harvesting, accusing him of being a British intelligence agent. And I wrote a piece actually saying I'm a big admirer of Geoffrey Nice, but that having experienced his driving in Dubrovnik, I'm pretty confident in confirming that he's not 007. But that kind of reaction from Beijing just shows that they do feel the pressure.
Yeah, a good metric is just seeing what they are the most vocal about hating and doing more of that thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of Global Times articles about the Uyghur Tribunal. And I found it interesting because they didn't really respond to the China Tribunal in the same way. But I also think it's because the China Tribunal had more of a splash than the Communist Party probably expected. Because when that started, it wasn't like a hugely, publicized, like it wasn't really covered in all the papers. But once they came out with their verdict, I remember seeing for the first time, for the first time in years, or the first time ever for some of these, Western media, them actually talking about organ harvesting. Because the China Tribunal had come out and said that it was happening. So it was interesting to see that, we were in Hong Kong at the time. Remember? It was last summer. Oh, no, summer 2019, where suddenly
the last summer kind of faded into obscurity.
Yeah. But suddenly you see The Guardian covering organ harvesting and the New York Times and,
Yeah,
they never talk about it. So yeah,
the New York Times covered it. I don't remember seeing them talk about the China Tribunal.
I saw it on NBC though.
It's on NBC. Yeah, though that story kind of faded away. Like most media is very vocal about Xinjiang, for example. For some reason, like the China Tribunal, the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is killing its own citizens for their organs, that story didn't stick around too long.
Oh, it's an old story, Chris.
But it never happened back when it was an old story.
Yeah,
I also as bad as the Uyghur concentration camps are, killing people for their organs is a whole other level.
Well, it's also something they're doing to the Uyghurs.
Right. But that's not being covered typically by the media that are covering the concentration camps.
Yeah, you hardly ever hear about, at least my impression is you hardly hear about the organ harvesting of Uyghurs. Despite all the other coverage. But I think it's important, like we've talked about, what the Western world can do. I think it's important to remember that there is a very narrow window for when that can happen. Right now, China is very vulnerable to sanctions. But Shelley has mentioned, they're trying to eliminate that weakness. They're trying to create their digital currency. They're trying to create alternate systems. Already, China has an incredibly powerful tool to sanction the West. We discovered this in the coronavirus when suddenly, they put pressure like, don't talk about the origin of the coronavirus, otherwise you won't get PPEs, because all of this is made in China now. So more and more, we will find that the ability of the West to put pressure on China diminishes as China is able to put pressure on the West.
Definitely. And that's why I think one of the other really important things that the West needs to do, and incidentally, I tend not to use the phrase the West, because I also think democracies in Asia, like Japan and Korea and others, need to be part of this as well. But
that's a better way to put it.
The democratic world needs to reduce its strategic dependency on China and diversify supply chains. So make sure that whether it's PPE or any other product that we're currently dependent on China for, we start sourcing it from other places, either producing it ourselves or from our allies or other markets like India, like Japan, Korea, South America. There are plenty of places in the world that we ought to be increasing trade with, where even countries that have, plenty of countries have human rights challenges, but countries that it is not such a huge both ethical dilemma and national interest dilemma for us to trade with. So diversifying our supply chains, I think, is really important.
It's amazing because Xi Jinping said this in the new 5-year plan that they came out with, where he literally said that the goal is to, lessen Chinese dependence on other countries while at the same time making other industries dependent on China. So they literally said that this is what they're going to do. And it's like everybody's ignoring that happened.
Well, we should be, on this particular issue, we should be learning from Xi Jinping in reverse and making ourselves less dependent on China. And yeah.
So I know, as somebody who's been very involved and passionate about Hong Kong for so many years, everything that's happened can't be easy for you to see. Are you at all hopeful for the future of Hong Kong, or like what's your feeling now?
Yeah, I mean, my feeling now is definitely incredibly sad to see this great city that was once my home, where I began my career, both as a journalist and as a human rights activist. I mean, I was involved in human rights work for other parts of Asia from Hong Kong when I lived there. So I was speaking out in Hong Kong for Myanmar, for East Timor, for North Korea. So incredibly sad to see that space just evaporate and Hong Kong become a totally CCP-controlled city. And especially sad right now to see the Apple Daily forced to close, essentially strangled to death. Because it was a paper that I wrote for every week, and that I write for many publications around the world, but it was always my favorite publication to write for, because they gave me complete freedom to write about what I wanted. There was no editorial sort of restriction. There was not even a word count restriction. So theoretically, I could write I tried not to be too long, but I could go a lot longer than I would for many other publications. So really sad about that, and really sad for the courageous staff of the Apple Daily. So yeah, right now feeling very pretty bleak about Hong Kong. I think, to answer your question, am I hopeful? I am hopeful, I think, for a few reasons. Firstly, I mean, if one didn't have hope that freedom would one day prevail, you may as well kind of give up, because you've got to have that hope to sustain the cause. But secondly, history shows that dictators don't last forever. A lot of countries have changed when we least expected them to, whether it was the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of apartheid in South Africa. I myself have been involved in struggles for freedom in places like East Timor, and of course, Burma, Myanmar had a glimmer of hope, and now that's been reversed. So sometimes there's a step forward and a step back. But I think history does show overall that dictators don't last forever, and that gives me hope. And the third thing that gives me hope is the courage and commitment of Hong Kong people. I mean, I was at a rally and protest on June the 12th to mark the second anniversary of one of the big protests in Hong Kong in 2019. And there were literally thousands and thousands of Hong Kongers, many of whom have recently arrived in the UK, taking part in this. Somebody told me they thought there could be 10,000. I don't know if that's correct, but certainly there were several thousand. And the spirit that they had was extraordinary. I mean, they were cheerful, they were determined, they were committed. And we marched we had a rally at Marble Arch and then marched from Marble Arch to Trafalgar Square. And I spoke at the final rally in Trafalgar Square. But just seeing Trafalgar Square filled with Hong Kongers gave me hope that they haven't given up, even those who've gone into exile. And so if they haven't given up, we can't give up either.
I think that's a very important message. It's sometimes darkest before the dawn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Benedict, thank you so much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure having you on. For anyone watching who wants to follow you, I know you're not writing for the Apple Daily anymore, but where can they follow you?
Well, probably the easiest way is to follow me on Twitter. I'm just by my name, Benedict Rogers, or they can look at Hong Kong Watch's website, which is hongkongwatch.org.
Great. Well, yeah, take care. I'm sure we'll be talking soon about the next horrible thing to happen to Hong Kong, sadly.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me. Great to be with you.
Always a pleasure. Bye-bye, Winnie the Pooh.